Hey everybody, my name is Spencer Walsh. Welcome to today's show. We have full reporting on the big Jamaal Bowman primary, including a really interesting piece about a trip that really did change his mind in a big way. It was to Israel, 2021 visit to the West Bank, where the New York congressman lost his hope for a two-state solution. That is the political piece we're going to be breaking into today. Also taking a look at another bombing that kills dozens in the Al-Mawasi attack, really pretty disgusting crime. Also, the French election is coming up, and the left is in threatening distance. They have formed an effective coalition. Meanwhile, both right-wing parties, there is the kind of dominant Marine Le Pen party, but there also is a fragment of the old right wing, the kind of more business Republican type, French version right wing still left, and they're going to be fighting that out. But we will be leading today with some pretty eye-opening new reports. This is in CNN tonight. So the U.S. is apparently concerned Israel's Iron Dome could be overwhelmed in a war with Hezbollah. And the question is, that is definitely a very possible scenario based on pretty much any, military, non-Israeli, essentially military analysts that I have heard speak on this subject in the post-October 7th world. They apparently, according to CNN, have serious concerns that even in the event of a full-blown war between Israel and Hezbollah, the Iran-backed militant group could overwhelm the air defenses in the north, including the much-vaunted Iron Dome air defense system, 3 U.S. officials told CNN. And it's really because they have a lot of kind of cheap rockets that aren't going to really do too much except for, just be blown up by the Iron Dome, while the much more impactful ones go through. They are, by all accounts, just about as powerful as they've ever been, and they're not under any sort of blockade, so, and it's complete military besiegement, so they will be able to restock a lot easier. So the fears which the U.S. officials said have been communicated to them by Israel, that the Iron Dome could be vulnerable to Hezbollah's vast arsenal of missile and drones, are only rising in Israel as Israel has increasingly indicated to U.S. officials that is preparing for a land and air incursion into Lebanon. So I think that is the line essentially has been, hey, they're actually pretty serious about this Lebanon thing. This is what the U.S. has been kind of saying. Not, you better stop this. This is, the red line. You're going to really get us involved into a world war, or, maybe not a world war, but a full blown out regional war. With definitely, threatening American troops being on the ground more than they ever have been. And this is also something I'm trying to write about for the new Substack, vantages.substack.com. Go check it out. We already got the first piece up and sitting there. But it has been pretty clear, essentially, from Yoav Gallant's rhetoric, and literally they started using white phosphorus when the first few weeks of the incursion in not just Gaza, but southern Lebanon as well. They, as soon as Hezbollah had continued to stand up with the Palestinians and with Hamas, they essentially continued to have to fight them off, and Hezbollah slowly kind of crept up, and, they have Israeli internals has assassinated commanders. Of course, there's been a lot of civilian damage from that as well, getting deeper and deeper into Lebanon. And of course, it kind of came to a head as well with that video, that 9-minute video of Hezbollah that Hezbollah put out, essentially saying that we can go anywhere we want inside Israel, or for example, at least the port of Haifa, without being detected. And they were able to take a lot of pictures in key areas of one of Israel's most important ports there in Haifa, so that is a big thing that has flared some tensions a little bit recently. We believe that at least some Iron Dome batteries will be overwhelmed, said a senior admin official. An Israeli official said that would be more likely. That the sentence does not make any sense. An Israeli official said that would be more likely if Hezbollah conducted a large-scale attack, principally using precision-guided weapons, which could be challenging for the system to defend against. Hezbollah has been stockpiling precision-guided munitions and missiles from Iran for years, which Israel has repeatedly raised concerns about. And again, this is something that they're going to be using as pretext, like they're violating the border. What is the UN? We have to go back to like they want to take it all back to this Litani River. There's definitely going to be something we're going to be hearing a lot about. It's a border, kind of a natural border that is well into Lebanon that the Israelis essentially want to push Hezbollah back to. And, the fact that they care so deeply about a UN resolution that they are willing to use that as a pretext to say, where's the UN? Why aren't they enforcing their resolutions? And we have to just blow up, civilians en masse in Lebanon. And yeah, this is the thing about Israel. They never, and they openly brag about it. They never, and this is some of what we saw after the wake of the Iranian attack. They can't comprehend just a military on military war. They're openly talking about how we're going to make Beirut, we're going to make Lebanon look like another Gaza. Even the moderates say that with pride. And when the Iran attack happened, they're just like, oh, Israeli beaches before, Israeli beaches after. It's like, yeah, because it was a military on military attack. So, like, that is how it's supposed to go. It's a very incomprehensible, going all the way back to the 1980s, for example, and much before with the Sabra and Shatila massacre. Like, with the founding of Israel, it was built on massacring and displacing and attacking civilians. It's really just going at the core of the existing society and trying to supplant a Jewish first one in it. The Jewish state. That is really what they're trying to do. But the IDF said it was unaware of any damage to the system, but Israeli officials have told the U.S. they believe the Iron Dome could be vulnerable, particularly in northern Israel, and have been surprised at the sophistication of Hezbollah's strikes to date. The two U.S. officials said a primary concern is Hezbollah using a large number of precision-guided munitions and missiles, said a source familiar with the threat. So the Lebanese militant group also published that 9 million video this week. So the big question here is, what is the U.S. going to do about this? The possibility for war has continued to increase as the prospect of a ceasefire deal has faded. If a deal is reached, then there is a parallel diplomatic deal between Israel and Hezbollah that has been negotiated by U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein that the U.S. believes would go into effect. So it would be kind of pretty tough with this ceasefire deal that Israel has essentially just swatted away from Joe Biden after he proposed it all serious in the White House. But cross-border attacks between Israel and Hezbollah reached a new high last week, and Israel warned Hezbollah on Tuesday of the prospect of all-out war after the drone video was published. The Israeli officials have told the U.S., and the U.S. agrees, that they have the resources to carry out an offensive against Hezbollah if they need to, particularly if its campaign in Rafah in southern Gaza winds down, according to officials familiar with the discussions. The IDF intends to still maintain a presence in Gaza, but its fiercest operations in the enclave would largely be over after Rafah, officials said. Still, U.S. officials do not believe that Israel has a tenable transition and post-war governance plan for Gaza that would ensure that the enclave does not, again, fall under militant control if Israel has to shift resources toward a war with Lebanon. And I think it would have been very tough for them to pull that off, even if Hezbollah hadn't come in there, but it's going to be damn well tougher now. This is quite a paragraph here. U.S. officials have not explicitly told Israel that they oppose any attack against Hezbollah, but they're warning them that their actions could lead to greater war, which the two sides don't actually want, U.S. officials said. So essentially, if past performance is an indication of future performance, or future results, or whatever the saying is, they're going to do it because Israel has stated openly that they want to do it. And they have essentially made up their mind on that. And the U.S. eventually, whether you like it or not, is going to accept it. Because, they're not saying it now. It's going to be like, oh, please don't go into Rafah. They go into Rafah. Oh, but you didn't go to Rafah serious enough, so it's okay. You just did a full-on offensive. Well, we didn't really say anything about it at the time, but Israel's our greatest ally. They're already in it, so we have to support them. Like, that's essentially, I think it's very, very key. If you put, I personally, for one, do not get the case to not, when you read the sentence, that they have not explicitly told Israel that they oppose any attack, but they're warning them that their actions could lead to a greater war, which the two sides don't actually want, despite literally Israel saying they don't want it. I don't get how you don't see that as, okay, this is going to happen, and the U.S. is most likely going to support it in at least a material way. Israel has made the case that it can pull off a, quote, blitzkrieg, which is, by the way, an absolutely incredible choice of word. But the U.S. is warning them that they may not be able to ensure that it remains a limited campaign, the official said. And again, in other words, they're still thinking this is, not Yom Kippur War, 1973. Good old IDF came in, blew up everyone because they got a tip off from the U.S. and they were able to finish any war before it even started. Does not seem likely. During the Secretary of State Antony Blinken's recent trip to the Middle East, he told an Arab counterpart that it appears Israel is intent on launching an incursion into Lebanon, according to a source familiar with the meeting. Love this quote. It seems that they, meaning Israel, are very serious about going into Lebanon, the person said. The Arab official's response to Blinken, the source added, was that Hezbollah has communicated they will not stop their strikes on Israel until Israel stops its operations in Gaza. So this Arab official is like, hey, they're making a point here, essentially. And Israel officials have told the U.S. that one of its main goals in the offensive would be to push Hezbollah back, creating a buffer zone between Israel and Lebanon, allowing tens of thousands of Israelis who've been forced out of their homes in the north because of the cross-border attacks to return. And yeah, again, it does suck. It really does suck to be forced out of your homes. I have nothing but sympathy for those Israelis. So right now, again, seems bottom line, U.S. is very up to this, but in a weird way, they don't kind of get what's happening. Like with this Blinken quote, it seems like they're actually pretty serious about this. Like, again, no shit. Like, have you not been paying attention at all to anything that's been happening over the past now 9 months? Like, they're living in their own fantasy world. I think the IDF too is to some extent, but the Americans to another level. I think they, are almost, it seems, in a sense of denial that this is ever going to happen in the first place. But, push comes to shove, they're probably going to support their greatest allies. This is some pretty crazy stuff. This is a piece in Politico about Jamaal Bowman, who they kind of set the scene here. He goes to Hebron in the West Bank. He had just been in the Middle East for 3 days, but he was already seeing sights. And again, I called him a Q and Politico with a great piece here. That day, along with a handful of congressional colleagues on a trip sponsored by the liberal Zionist organization J Street. So this is, presumably a place where they would, come away with a more positive impression of Israel. It was essentially the opposite. They went to a live UN school, and they heard live ammo and smelled tear gas seeping through the school's walls. Bowman left profoundly demoralized. There are streets they cannot walk and places they cannot go, simply because they are Palestinian, he wrote, sharing a picture of himself posing with the students. And by the way, it probably feels pretty deeply about that because he was a principal. It's a big part of his identity. When I asked about their dreams, their answer was simple: freedom. The occupation must end. Reflecting back on the experience 3 years later, Bowman says you can almost breathe it in the air how suffocating the West Bank felt with the settlement expansions. The trip was a transformational moment for him, he tells me, one that left him doubtful about the prospect of a two-state solution, the default policy that most of Democrats in America and liberal Zionists the world over support. The two-state solution was the thing that you could say so everyone leaves you alone, so that at the very least, you could satisfy both sides, Palestinian freedom and the Jewish state, he says. But what he took from 5 days of meetings and interviews over boxed lunches and fancy dinners was that there was no political will at top from the Israeli government to pursue a two-state solution or engage in any suitable, sustainable peace process, and that America's willingness to send significant aid to Israel without any conditions attached was therefore unwise. This transformative moment could cost Bowman his seat in Congress. And this is a really kind of respectable moment, I think, for Bowman, because it shows that he was able to make and really come by his positions in the most, I think it makes him look good, because he used to be somebody who was a lot more moderate on the issue, really drew a lot of ire from the DSA despite being, good on everything else. He was, some of the more left-wing parts of the people that, elected him and love the squad and all that, they're like, yeah, you could do a little bit better on the Palestinian issue. So he goes with this liberal Zionist organization, and now he is literally risking his career. The most expensive primary campaign, 3 times more money, by the way, the entire British election that is happening right now. Like, that is something, it is unbelievable, and it's absolutely disgusting. And the vast majority of it, by the way, is for George Latimer, his opponent, the Westchester County executive, who has made questioning his unquestioning support for Israel, a key distinction between him and Bowman. One of the largest concentrations of Jews in America live in the district, and also incredibly wealthy Jews. And at least with my experience with the Jewish community, I would bet my bottom dollar there is a correlation there. And as coverage of I think also probably the biggest one though would be age for the most part in the Jewish community that divides, Zionist, anti-Zionist, pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, I guess, to put it in such binary terms. But as the coverage of the race focuses on Bowman versus Latimer as a proxy war, it's interesting to look at how he got here, and this is really what it is. So in 2020, he really got a crash course on it. He beat Elliot Engel, and pro-Israel groups spent about $2 million on the campaign. He wishes they were spending that much now, but Bowman had support from left-wing organizations such as the Justice Democrats and was propelled by a hot mic moment in the middle of the Black Lives Matter protests. Engel told an ally that if I didn't have a primary, I wouldn't care about attending a news conference about police brutality. At the time, Bowman sought to downplay. I forgot about that. That was a crazy moment. Now, that just came back to me in a big way. So it was a clear loss for the Israel lobby, but it wasn't, at the time, The Intercept concluded, which is interesting, a outright win for the Palestinian rights movement. He was a anti-BDS congressman. He supported the two-state solution, as we talked about, and it wasn't, all hunky-dory for the Palestinian movement. A big thing was his vote for the Iron Dome that really pissed a lot of people off, especially, throughout DSA. And, I think I remember actually, there was a DSA group in my college where, one of the elected state representatives of New York City came to speak, and I was like, why did you guys stand by Jamaal Bowman in the vote where they eventually kept him on in DSA? And he was just like, one mistake or one bad vote doesn't define a person. He's a good guy, whatever. But boy, was that the right call, because he eventually, has an open mind, has, solid principles, and he wasn't, about to let reality, pass him by when it kind of smacked him in his face during that Israel trip. While he was a proud member of the squad, he did break from them on Israel, though he did co-sponsor a bill that would have limited how Israel uses aid. But the JC trip really kind of flipped his perspective. He visited Jerusalem, saw the Iron Dome, and toured Yad Vashem, Israel's largest Holocaust memorial, and parts of the West Bank. He says he went to the Gaza border and attempted to cross, but was denied by the U.S. government due to a potential security risk. According to Bowman, Jeremy Ben-Ami, founder and president of J Street, called the trip a graduate-level course in 1 week. Bowman concurred with the discussions with political leaders on both sides of the conflict. So this essentially goes through to where Israel, J Street, despite, or maybe because of the fact that they led him on the trip, which eventually led him to really come out strong for Palestine, pulled their endorsement of him after sticking by him for quite a long time. Like, he was sponsoring bills that were strengthening the Abraham Accords. He was a pretty center guy when it came to Israel, pretty moderate. So they eventually pulled in January their endorsement of him, which was probably inevitable, given it, kind of the heightening of the contradictions that were going on there. This is Bowman's theory of the case, essentially that, the Jewish community to a certain extent is not a monolith. And we've broken down this before, but it talks about this little anecdote of him kind of getting supported by Alex Robb, a Jewish resident in the district. Bowman was praised a lot by this guy who said, "You're doing everything you can do. I'm so grateful for you speaking up. I call your staff, then I get choked up and I can't finish." Rob told him, "I wish my whole community lived my Jewish values like you do." And I think it's good to a certain extent that Hastings-on-Hudson, a lot of those kind of Dobbs Ferry, a lot of those districts that are kind of the southern part of Westchester, or those towns that are in the southern part of Westchester along the Hudson, that are kind of these younger, professional, white, relatively upper class, but much more kind of that fertile breeding ground for I'd compare it most closely to almost the Williamsburg, Bay Ridge, stereotype of this very kind of progressive, just fresh out of college, getting a good job, has very strong kind of left-wing values that maybe aren't the most in place, and their parents are Republicans, and everyone thinks they'll become a Republican when they're older. Those type of people who are essentially younger, professional, wealthier white people who have been pretty open to the Jamaal Bowman, Bernie Sanders, AOC brand of politics in the past. If he can win those people, if he can turn those people out in a big way, that could be his saving grace. That could be his key to victory, because you have his strong part in the South, and then Bowman's strong part in the South. Latimer is very strong in the North and in the East. But then if you go west to the Hudson River, kind of geographically in that district, that is where he can really make some progress. But the race is really getting increasingly nasty. Bowman has received multiple death threats and racist attacks during his time in office, which have increased in cadence. And there's been a lot of weird rhetoric, to say the least, coming from George Latimer about Bowman and his race. Latimer reportedly accused Bowman of taking money from Hamas, which Bowman threatened a defamation suit. Latimer accused Bowman of debate of preaching and screaming at Republicans on the steps of the Capitol. Bowman fired back, the angry black man is a Southern strategy in the North. In a recent interview with Politico, Bowman was even more explicit. He's not just anti-black racist, he's anti-Muslim racist, Latimer said. And this was another thing. It was a very, it's really kind of weird saying you don't mention people who are not black or brown. There's a whole district, Jamaal, and that you've ignored, and the district knows you've ignored it. So playing to this really strong, ever powerful surge of white resentment centered around this, again, I would say like this, uppity black man who's going to be too loud, a little bit, too embarrassing. Oh, he pulled the fire alarm. That's a lot of stuff what AIPAC is, kind of capitalizing on. And that is, not necessarily all the Israel stuff, but is also hindered by the emotions that are very, very high in that district about, think about how many people know somebody or have personal kids who were, in Columbia University for that protest that Jamaal Bowman was incredibly sympathetic to. So like that rage filled with his figure as a black man who's very passionate for issues that are definitely left of center, that is going to be a powerful surge, and it's a very potent edge of what a lot of very bad people have relied on in the past, and I think he is someone who is relying on it now. Elisha Wiesel, the son of famed writer and Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel, called him an anti-Semite, all but called him an anti-Semite in an ad, which is pretty crazy, and I think that's definitely going to have something a pretty big impact, because I was essentially I live essentially on the border of that district, and I know pretty much for a fact that you're taught in school who Elie Wiesel is, what his what he stands for, and his incredible impact in writing on the Holocaust and so much more. But here's that ad to give you a taste of what Elisha Wiesel had to say.
Jamaal Bowman voted against condemning Hamas's brutal attack. He supported a resolution calling the founding of Israel a catastrophe, and Jamaal Bowman repeated Hamas lies, denying that women...
And that's very sneaky, because that's just a thing that is commemorating the Nakba, which is what pretty much everybody would say is a pretty horrible crime committed against the Palestinians.
Women were raped and babies were butchered. My father taught that anti-Semitism begins with lies and conspiracy theories, and it ends with violence that consumes any society that tolerates it. Will you make your voice heard? Will you confront Jamaal Bowman's lies and conspiracy theories, or will you sit by silently?
So yeah, that could be a very, apologize again for the looping there, but that could be a very, very potent ad put forth by AIPAC. AIPAC is funded by MAGA, racist, right-wing Republicans, and the same Republicans who tried to overturn the 2020 election. So my so-called lifelong Democratic opponent is partnering with those people to take me out, Bowman said during a recent organizing call. AIPAC before me had Elliot Engel, so they had full control of this district, just like they have full control of Congress. But as his campaign continued, Bowman has felt an increasing chasm of space between his political beliefs and many of his constituents. AIPAC was never on his side, but he's noticed a shift from even former allies. Since October 7th, even some of the quote-unquote progressives have moved to the right, for lack of a better term. He's responded in large part by leaning into his progressive bona fide, securing the DSA endorsement after his fracas with the group in 2021. and really rallying and essentially collaborating with Bowman. If his 2021 trip to Israel sparked change, the increasingly nasty campaign with Latimer, the intra-Democratic Party anger over Israel writ large post-October 7th has turned into a full-blown flame that's defined and engulfed this race. And the two candidates' understanding of how the issue of Israel is refracted within their district may well determine who the next congressperson from New York 16 will be. And Bowman, to give him credit, he is putting his career on the line, and he's doing it to fight for Gaza. So, big credit to him no matter what happens, and I would personally bet that he's going to lose this race. And I really do hate to say it because I'm pulling very, very hard for him to win. But, this is going to be, if he does win by some miracle, I think it'll really show way more potency than we thought for the Palestinian issue in the Democratic Party. But given the very disproportionately high number of people who are voting on this issue because of Israel in this district, I don't think it's necessarily extractable to every constituency all across the country, and that Biden, for example, in November is completely in the clear. But I think it probably would mean that it's definitely a lot less than any Palestinian activist would like. All right. We have this reporting from Israeli bombardment, from Al Jazeera, about Israeli bombardment of Gaza, killing dozens of people as it intensified its attacks on the besieged territory amid a worsening humanitarian crisis. The Gaza Health Ministry said the bodies of 30 people killed in Israeli raids arrived at Al-Ahli Hospital in Gaza on Friday in what described a difficult and brutal day. At least 25 people were also killed and 50 wounded in the Israeli attacks on tents for displaced Palestinians in the Al-Mawasi region near Rafah, which is in the south of coastal enclave, which is supposedly a safe zone. I remember an Israeli official saying that once upon a time, many months ago. In a separate incident, the Palestinian Civil Defense Agency and crews transported a number of people killed and injured in Israeli shelling of the Al-Shakush area northwest of Rafah. Israeli forces bombed the garage of the Gaza City municipality, as well as a 5-story building in the city. Al Jazeera Arabic correspondent Ismail El-Ghul reported. The health ministry said that Israeli military killed at least 35 Palestinians over the previous 24 hours, bringing the death toll since the invasion to 37,431 since October of 2023. Meanwhile, the humanitarian situation continued to deteriorate as a result of the Israeli blockade on the territory, which has brought Gaza to the verge of famine. The medical group Doctors Without Borders, known by its French initials MSF, said on Friday that it may have to suspend operations in Gaza because of dwindling healthcare supplies. And, essentially they have been without medical care since May 7th at this point. And this so-called, this systematic shutting down of UNRWA and this U.S. effort to, quote-unquote, take control of the situation to get in aid, really in coordination with Israel, they came up with the idea for the humanitarian pier in the first place. All that's been used for is aid, to launch a military operation, the exact opposite of aid, and the very little aid that's come in has sat on the beach, unable to be distributed because Israel has been killing anybody who is maintaining law and order for the Palestinians in the society. So it's, becoming a place where, even the UN now is not feeling safe to get in there and deliver aid. It explicitly blamed Israel, these groups, for the situation, saying its seizure and closure of the Rafah crossing last month had been a big hit. The gateway between Gaza and Egypt serves as a major artery for the entry of humanitarian assistance and aid workers. The closure of the Rafah crossing following Israel's offensive in the south of Gaza in early May, which, by the way, how the hell is this not seriously going, and entering into Rafah? Or in the eyes of the U.S. in their serious military invasion, like they literally shut off the border, they cut off all aid access, which is something that even the United States still to this day proclaims to care about for the Palestinians, about one of the only things. So it's pretty brutal to see. This has led to massive queues of trucks and perilous delays in the delivery of humanitarian assistance across Gaza. They say Israeli attacks have killed more than 270 humanitarian workers in Gaza since the start of the war, making the delivery of aid that does reach Gaza increasingly difficult. Israel launched its assault on Rafah earlier in May, despite international warnings, displacing hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, many of whom already fled other parts of Gaza. pretty exciting times for the French at the moment. They have had an election after some pretty bad parliamentary results. Emmanuel Macron, for some reason, decided to dissolve the parliament, even though he had years and years till elections, and he went down in the polls essentially even further after bad results for his party in the European elections. So he kind of plummets, and right now the left and then in first place the right are in the lead in France in what is an incredibly close race. It's about 33-28 spread between National Rally, Rassemblement National in the French terminology at 33%, and the NFP, Nouvel Front Populaire, at 27% there, and then Macron's party down at 20%. And then, of course, I guess if it's for whatever reason, we can mention the Republican Party, which used to be one of the top right-wing party in France. They're at 7%. So it's essentially going to be a race between the National Rally and the NFP, and it's something that they've underperformed or overperformed their polls before, but they really are within striking distance. It was a pretty incredible reunion here for them. This is a piece in Jacobin about it. It's a really solid alliance formed, or quick alliance, I guess is the more important part, formed for the snap election called by French President Emmanuel Macron. In the two-round contest this June 30th and July 7th, it will confront two main rivals, namely the center-right bloc led by Macron and the far-right. Thanks to unity built in record time, the left can win. The call for early parliamentary elections decided by Macron after Marine Le Pen's Rassemblement National swept the European elections on June 9th has caused an earthquake in the French politics. The unpopular president, whose candidates on 14.5%, received under half the votes of Le Pen's party at 31.5% in last Sunday's vote, hoped that divisions on the left would once again make him the only alternative to the right, the far right. He was wrong. Faced with the risk of far-right parliamentary majority and prime minister, various left-wing forces and green forces reacted with unusual speed. Mélenchon's France Insoumise, the Parti Socialiste, the Greens, the Communist Party, they'd already run together in the 2022 parliamentary elections, obtaining second place overall and breaking Macron's absolute majority and really making life, pretty miserable for him on a large number of priorities. And remember some of the protests that they have helped support in France over recent years. But since then, the left had returned to its traditional fratricidal dynamics. Pressured by street mobilizations calling for unity, these parties have decided to throw their resentment into the river, as Mélenchon put it in his usual lyrical tones. Just after a few days later, the Nouveau Front Populaire was born, with a common program and an agreement to distribute the constituencies among the different partners. In the election, 229 of the 577 seats will have candidates from France Insoumise, while 175 go to Parti Socialiste, and 92 from the Greens, 50 from the Communist Party, so on. Compared with the left-wing coalition formed for the 2022 parliamentary election, Macron's party lost some 131 candidacies. This rebalancing takes into account not only the current weight of each party in the National Assembly, where the La France Insoumise is the largest left-wing force, but also the results of the EU election, where Parti Socialiste obtained 14.6% of the vote, and France Insoumise, LFI, got 10%. The PAC's name refers to the historic left-wing alliance that governed France from 1936, while fascism was arriving in power in other European countries. The Popular Front, which achieved social conquests such as paid vacations, as a historical reference for France, as important as the Commune or the 1789 Revolution. It is definitely something that is conceivable. The opinion polls still put Rassemblement National in first place on around, this is a right-wing party, around 31%, only 3 points ahead of Nouveau Front Populaire. Ensemble, which is together, or Renaissance, I think. Macron's party is Macron's party is a further 10 points behind in what could really be a catastrophic third place. The French electoral system is majoritarian, so, top two go on to a runoff is essentially what it means. In most constituencies, a left-wing candidate will face a Rassemblement National candidate, leaving out the Macronists and, killing the center almost as quickly as it came to be. The Nouveau Front Populaire counts on the enthusiasm of progressive voters who can finally see reasons for hope in the middle of an increasingly right-leaning political landscape. It also has the support of the major unions, which have called for mobilizations against the far right and in support of the Nouveau Front Populaire following the historical inspiration of 1936. Still fresh in the memory are the demonstrations and strikes that paralyzed France last year in the protest against Macron's pension reform, the biggest mobilizations in decades. One of the coalition's flagship promises is abrogating Macron's reform, immediately returning to retirement at age 62, while also asserting the aim of the right to a pension at age 60. By contrast, the National Rally's candidate for Prime Minister backpedaled on his previous promise to repeal Macron's unpopular reforms, a move to addressed to business circles. So that is something that you see in the kind of populist right, and Nigel Farage kind of going about this. I think it'll come for him too, in a very interesting way. I really want to be a populist, but business is going to come knocking at my door, and they're going to start to have real problems. And they are natural allies of business. Eric Ciotti, the leader of Les Républicains, the traditional conservative force, had been expelled from his own party for attempting an alliance with Rassemblement National, Reconquête, an even more radical far-right party than Le Pen's party, led by pundit Eric Zemmour, has also seen its candidate for the European elections jump ship and called the electors to vote for the National Rally. All these factors have filled the left with hope, but the result is uncertain. The rightward shift in Macron, who has just pushed through an immigration law copied from the far right, has for years aided the National Rally's de-demonization strategy. Part of the traditional right will now directly join Bardela's camp, while others are at least ready to vote for him. The left has achieved unity in record time, but there are still some obstacles, such as who would take up the government leadership in case of victory. Mélenchon, who will have the largest number of parliamentarians on the Popular Front, provokes a strong rejection among the more centrist electorate. Thus, a consensus candidate is more likely to be sought. But the debate seemed secondary. The leaders of the left seem focused on mobilizing the electorate to repeat the feat of 1936 and turn the foretold disaster of a far-right government into hope for a social and green shift in French politics. It's a much-needed glimmer of hope in a Europe traumatized by the seemingly unstoppable rise of the far right. That is all the time we have for you today. We're back on Monday. It's Newsflash.